Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We had a little technical glitch here, but we're rolling. I'm Sarah Feigenholz. This is my dear colleague, Senator Ram Villavelum, and we are really excited that you're here. Um, our office has gotten more email about the transit issue, and I keep telling them that, than anything I've ever experienced, and justifiably so, because the people of the 6th Senate District depend on transportation possibly more than any other Senate district in the state. We're really in this very critical moment, and we are very cognizant of that, especially people in the city. But we want to take time to update you about what happened when we got the bill passed and what's happening next. Senator Villavelum and I are going to provide an overview of the state of transit, our efforts to reform, which was our primary goal, and support the systems. We're going to address a couple myths that are out there on TikTok that's going on around transit, especially the hashtag pizza thing, and answer some of the questions you have submitted when you signed up. We're going to also explain that the fiscal cliff, because a lot of people really don't know what that means. People are calling legislators' offices and saying, why are you cutting CTA? Well, we're not cutting CTA. Federal COVID support funds are running out at the end of this calendar year, 2025. Ridership has not returned to pre-COVID levels, which reduces the amount of money we bring in at the fare box. And we're not cutting RTA's budget. We're trying to figure out how to fill a hole. And while we're working to do this, we see what happens when we hobble along and just solve one little problem at a time in a patchwork system that really isn't serving our riders as much as it could. And, what we're looking to do is have more efficiency, reliability, safety, and compared to other metro areas, we are really lagging behind. And Ram's going to talk more about it. But he has really been busting himself to get this job done, and all of us in the Senate are really grateful to him. We know that he's held off on talking about funding before he got reliability and reform, consolidation. So I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about what was in House Bill 3438, the transit bill, and then we're going to go to questions that you have already submitted. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be with you all. And I want to thank Senator Feigenholz for her support of House Bill 3438 and really the transformational nature of its reforms and investments in our public transit system. I want to thank you all for participating. I know we did a town hall about 3 or 4 weeks ago to give everyone an update in the district. And I really appreciate your engagement. When Senator Feigenholz told me the number of emails that she received was in the thousands, certainly I think her district, you all are most engaged and most reliant on public transit, but it's really your voices that we're really relying on to help us push this forward. It's great to get in to be with you all. We have made a lot of progress. House Bill 3438 represents the culmination of a few years of work dating back to really during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the agencies reached out and said, look, we're experiencing a decline in ridership that was expedited due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to act. The legislature, we got together, we passed legislation that required the Chicago Metropolitan Agency on Planning to convene stakeholders, submit a report. They did that. We introduced 2 pieces of legislation that had provisions from that report. We had 8 Senate Transportation Committee hearings as well, with over 35 hours of testimony. We had over 12 or so negotiating meetings with the House, the Governor's Office, the Clean Jobs Coalition, the Labor Coalition, the Senate, and really it's represented in the product that we voted on right before the end of session in House Bill 3438. What's in House Bill 3438? It is no question the most historic reforms to our public transit system since its inception more than 4 decades ago. As you all know, we have 4 different agencies, 21 appointing authorities, 47 different appointments. And as someone said to me, that means everyone's accountable and nobody's accountable. So we wanted to address that governance issue. We also wanted to make sure that these agencies are working together. They all had their own service plans, their own capital plans, procurement processes, fair policies. The reality is, as Senator Feigenholz mentioned, everybody in this region wants to get from point A to point B in a safe, reliable, accessible, and integrated way. They're not looking at what the name of the agency is. They're trying to get to their doctor, their school, their job, right? And so that's what we really aim to achieve when we talk about structural reform. So as it relates to the reforms, we completely changed how it's structured. We made the number of appointing authorities go from 21 to 8. We reduced the number of appointments from 47 to 33. We made them overlapping, so you have board members that sit on both the main board and the service board, so that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing and vice versa. And we also centralize a lot of the decision making on service plans, capital plans, fair policy, 7 different apps. You heard me say that before, right? Between CTA, Metra, and PACE, and RTA, we're saying there should be one app. There should be one app, right? So we took care of a lot of that. We also really heard people, right? We heard that safety was an issue. So we created an Office of Public Safety in the NEDA board, the Northern. By the way, that was one of the bigger point of discussions was the name of the board. I did not care as much, but we settled on the Northeastern Illinois Transit Authority, NEDA, and part of that is hopefully it catches on. NEDA Ride is part of it, but the reality is we wanted to make sure this main board, this NEDA board, was empowered to make decisions and to ensure that everything was integrated and to ensure that the service plans, capital plans, fair policy, and so forth was integrated. But we also wanted to address the issues we heard, which is safety, creating an Office of Public Safety within the main authority, ensuring that law enforcement, violence prevention groups, social service groups were involved, creating a transit ambassador program. We've heard the successful stories of how it's worked in other major public transit systems. Making sure that as we tackle technology, again, one app, not 7, as we deal with transit-oriented development, there's a regional plan and not everyone working in their silo. So those are some of the parts of the reform that we really were able to tackle. The funding, this legislation represents the most unprecedented amount of funding from the state level that public transit has seen, again, since its inception 4 decades ago. It's a $1.5 billion investment in our public transit system. And I'm so grateful for Sarah's support because there was many that said, let's just give them the bare minimum. Let's fill the hole for next year. Let's not tackle the bigger issues, right? And another thing that we've heard, or another piece that we heard from all of our constituents is we want a system not just for tomorrow, but for the next 3 decades, right? For the next several decades. And this transformational investment of $1.5 billion, what does that mean? That means more frequency. That means bus rapid transit. That means creating new service. And for example, the suburbs. Right now, CTA serves 35 suburbs. They have the charge to serve all of suburban Cook County, right? They just haven't gotten there yet. And so this type of transformational investment can lead to new opportunities. Why is that important? Well, the last piece I'll say, and we can go to more of a discussion, is we have to acknowledge that our travel patterns are changing. That's what we've learned through this process. It used to be that you would come downtown from the suburbs and go back out. It's changed. People want to do more neighborhood to neighborhood transit. People want to do more suburb to suburb transit and collar county to collar county transit, right? If I want to visit my mom in Naperville and then go to Chicago Botanical Garden, we should be able to do that, right? And right now it's really hard to do that. And so it's a challenge, but again, we're not going to go back to the same travel patterns as we had prior to the pandemic. A lot of that has to do with remote work. We have to acknowledge that things have changed and patterns have shifted, and we need to have the investment and funding to help make sure we can meet those needs of all of our residents, including everyone on this call. So again, happy to talk more about this, but this is definitely historic legislation that we discussed at length, and I think we're working to make sure we get across the finish line.
Another thing, Ron, that I think you need to talk about is the environmental impact. And I learned from somebody also that that NETA's going to have an office.
Yes, so we first, in terms of the environmental impact, there's no question, right? And I'll say this, even if we had just built the fiscal cliff, that would have been a tremendous positive impact to our environment, to our climate. If we don't act and make sure this gets across the finish line, as the service boards and RTA have said, there will be a 40% cut to service. There will be more than 3,000 people that will start to get layoff notices, which is just horrific. And what do we think folks are going to do, right? They're either going to not be able to get to their job, their school, their doctor, or they're going to have to get in a car, whether it's ride share, whether it's their own car, their own vehicle, and so forth. That's what's going to happen. And so that's just, filling the gap of $771 million is important to maintain the positive impact to our environment that public transit currently has. Now, when we talk about 1.5 billion, that means more cars off the roads, right? That means people being able to say, it's about a 15-minute public transit ride versus a 20 or 10-minute rideshare ride. I can do the extra 5 minutes and I don't need to take a ride share, or I don't need to get a ride from someone or take my own car. And so that'll make a huge impact, right, on our environment. Bus rapid transit. Bus rapid transit essentially is a much more cost-efficient way to having rapid transit along any corridor instead of doing a train, right? Train, the infrastructure costs, everything that goes into it will take decades, billions of dollars. Bus rapid transit means you're able to get from point A to point B quickly. And that'll have a huge impact, right? And so the environmental impact is huge. We've definitely wanted to involve IDOT because IDOT is, as everyone knows, the Illinois Department of Transportation is our state agency that has the holistic picture of what is happening from our roads and bridges to our mass transit. And so we involve them in a couple different ways. One is we involve them by they're the ones that hire the consultant to help us through this transition to this new entity and this new reforms that have been we voted on. And then two, we certainly involve them in the transparent development space and really the inner city public transit. And we have to remember, right, this is not just about the city of Chicago, suburbs of Cook, Collars. It's our entire state. We have historic funding in here for the 54 downstate transit agencies and that serve 95 counties. And what we constantly hear from them is we want to get connected to Chicago, right? And so whether it's the Quad Cities or Peoria or Rockford, we've already seen the Rockford plans with Metra, Kankakee. And so we know that our entire state is dependent on this legislation to really increase that connectivity. So IDOT definitely will have a role.
The advocates that came to my office were talking about OD, housing near rapid transit, right? And the sad stories that people would get off of a train and the bus that to take them out to the suburbs was pulling away. And I think you referred to it earlier when you talked about planning and coordination, that the silos and the fight notes have really prohibited because they haven't been collaborating.
That's right.
Same thing with years ago, we passed a never happened.
That's right.
So it's in this law now, which for me was a lot. And also the You know, I mean, this isn't just us throwing good money after bad service. They have to be accountable to us and to the rider.
That's right. And that's why you see metrics like performance metrics and service standards. Those are, it centers on ridership and vehicle miles travel or vehicle revenue miles, passenger miles traveled. That's a way, frequency, those are all metrics that will hold the service boards to a higher standard to say, you need to be this frequent or you need to work to increasing your ridership. And I think that's really important because it is about accountability. We're asking taxpayers to invest in this, system, and we know why. Because you talk to the civic committee, the commercial club, civic federation, talk to organized labor, environmental groups. They all agree that the positive economic impact that comes from our public transit system, if it goes down, it's going to be devastating. And the business organizations say, not just for Chicago,
Yeah.
for the entire region, for the state, for the Midwest. We have to remember that there's as the Railroad Association likes to say, we're the only state that has all 6 Class 1 railroads. A lot goes through our state, from across the country. And so there's a lot riding on getting this right. And it's not just one, region or another. It's everything's connected.
Well, I'm really excited about it happening. We're going to get to some of the questions. So let's start with, how do we get bold transit action rather than short-term fixes?
Well, I would say help us, get our legislation across the finish line. This has been a journey, and I can tell you that from the beginning, for 3 years, yes, and there was always discussion of the fiscal cliff, the fiscal cliff, the fiscal cliff. Well, that number was approximately 730 million, increased to 771 million. And that's the one number that people really talked about the most, but it's always been the number that everyone has indicated, from the Clean Jobs Coalition to the agencies and organized labor, that gets us the service that we have today. I think we have the ability to do a poll on Zoom. We won't do it, but if I took a poll, we did a poll on Zoom, I would say out of the 150 folks that are on, I think 150 would say we want service that's better than what we have today. Well, if we want that, we need the reforms, which is what we passed, and we need the funding, which is what we passed. And
Right.
to have $1.5 billion in investment, to make sure that there's more frequency, there's cleanliness, there's safety, there's transit ambassadors across the region
Yes.
to help people both with getting from point A to point B, but also to deal with nonviolent situations, to make sure that there's technology that works, right? And you're not having to think about how to get connected. That's what it's going to take. And also to reimagine, because we're going to have to reimagine service, right? From neighborhood to neighborhood and suburb to suburb. That's what it's going to take. And so I would say that, we put a bold plan forward. We passed it out of the Senate. We need to get it across the finish line. So your assistance in helping us do that is what will get it done.
Right. I'm telling you, we're going to try and get that number 11 bus back on
Yes.
Lincoln Avenue. But another thing is, all of the new buses that are going to be purchased have to be zero admission.
That's right. And then again, that's why the funding is so important. And there are challenges with this. The supply for zero emissions buses is challenging right at the moment. That being said, we did put it in the legislation, and we have put it in previous legislation that by 2040, we want the fleet of the CTA to be zero emissions. And so that is our goal, which means that the lifespan of a diesel bus is about 14 years, which means by next year we put in legislation saying they should stop purchasing diesel buses.
Yeah.
And so that's a really critical part of this. And it's going to cost a lot of money to replace the entire CTA bus fleet.
But it's also going to be better for the environment, worth every nickel.
I would encourage anyone that disagrees to stand behind a CTA bus as it's taking off. I had the unpleasant experience of doing that, and which is why I support, getting the zero emissions.
So this is an interesting question.
Yeah.
Which is, so how is NETA totally eliminating CTA, RTA PACE and Metra? I mean, is there going to be blowback on this? What are the negative and positive effects?
I think this is a great question because I think we reached a phenomenal middle ground here, right?
Mhm.
We know that CTA and Metro and PACE have been in existence for a long time. We understand that they have an expertise in delivering service. They have labor management contracts. They work with their workers, wages, benefits, and working conditions. They all have certain debt obligations,
Mhm.
but we know that they've been in their communities that they're providing service in. So we're saying that in this legislation, they are intact. These service boards are intact. What we're changing, and I would say really revolutionizing, is they're they're not going to be able to work in silos. They're not going to be able to each have their own app, their own service plan,
Right.
their own capital plan. You have to work together, and the NETA board is going to be making sure that you do. And we're going to make sure that, as I mentioned before, if the Metro train comes in, the CTA bus has to be waiting there to make sure that person has a connection to their job. Same thing in the suburbs where Pace is going to have to be there at 8 o'clock for the 8:10 Metro train that's leaving the city. And so that's not what's happening right now, and we're fixing that with this legislation while keeping intact the service boards because they do provide, they do deliver service. So
speaking of the service boards, I know that it must have been very difficult to dislodge some of the ways that they were functioning and thinking. And one of our questions from someone here asked if you have received a lot of messaging and how they feel about the consolidation, both those on the governing boards.
well, I think that as with everything, change is difficult, and we're trying to really make this system work for the future, right? And so I was with one of the board members of those service boards yesterday, and she said, this is exactly what we need. We needed this direction. Now, I'm sure there's others that would disagree. What we tried to do, though, is create this middle ground, right? Of look, you're going to continue to exist as a service board, deliver service, have your current debt obligations, your labor management contract. However, when it comes to safety, when it comes to customer service, when it comes to fair policy, right? We want to make sure it's centralized and it's regionalized, so people aren't trying to figure it out. We want to make it.
It's accommodating.
It's accommodating. It's all about people that are riding the system. We need to make it easier. And it's not just the million people that are riding today. We want to make that 2 million.
Right.
And how do we get there? We get there through having a system that works.
So speaking of safety, I'm sure that this may have come from someone in SD6, is there are these increasing incidents, especially on the red line. And what do you have? I know you said that there's going to be a policing component to this and a safety component, but what specific strategies do you see them employing for rider safety on the red line?
No, it's a great question, and it's obviously that and accountability are near the top in terms of the most important questions that we've gotten and the feedback that we've gotten. And I want to take this moment to say that we've worked incredibly well with the House, Representative Evadina Delgado, Representative Cam Buckner, Representative Marcus Evans, Representative Marty Moreland. And really, it was through Representative Delgado's work, that we came to a consensus on how to tackle this safety issue. And really, what that is acknowledging that we're not the safety experts, we're not police officers, we're not social workers. And so what we did was in the legislation, we created a law enforcement task force made up of law enforcement. And an important point here is the public transit system in our region touches hundreds of municipalities. You know, it's 6 counties, hundreds of municipalities. So anytime there's an incident, obviously in the city, it's the Chicago Police Department, to some degree the Cook County Sheriff, but there's multiple levels of law enforcement that are involved. So we said, let's get them on one task force, let them get together, let them make recommendations, submit those recommendations to the Office of Public Safety that's created in the new entity, have a council there that's made up of law enforcement, violence prevention groups, social service groups. They make those recommendations to the board members of the new board, and then the board votes on a comprehensive safety plan, right? Not just for Chicago, not just for the suburbs of Cook or the college, but the entire region, and making sure that it's not just a one faceted approach, right? So we have law enforcement. We're also inserting transit ambassadors who will be able to help with customer service and make sure that any nonviolent situations are handled appropriately. But then we're also looking to invest in organizations like the Night Ministries and Thresholds, that are able to help with homelessness issues and mental and behavioral health issues. And so we're wanting to make sure there's a place and expertise for every kind of situation that can arise. And of course, cleanliness and other. But I'll tell you this, Sarah, and every transit expert I've talked to, the number one way to help with safety is more riders.
Right. Yes.
It's also a catch-22 because the way you get more riders is
you provide safety.
Yes, and so it's a challenge, but we feel like we wanted to go in a data-driven way where we're relying on experts to tell us and make recommendations. But we put those tools in place, and we also said what's currently being spent on safety is about $95 million. I think we can all agree that it's not being spent wisely or the best way.
Right.
But we said that could be the marker as to where the funding for that safety plan can come from. And so we did make sure that we signal how much should be spent on this safety.
So suburbanites struggle with this because they feel like, because you and I are both mostly from the city, that this is a city centric, which it's not. It is very northern regional. And how do you explain the impact of this bill and prove to people it's not a city only issue?
Well, first and foremost, you talk to any of the business groups, Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, the Civic Committee, the Commercial Club, the Civic Federation, the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, and essentially, if any part of this system breaks down, the economic impact will be devastating to our entire region and our entire state. We're talking about 1 million people that rely on this system every day to get to work, to get to school, to get to their doctor. We're talking about 17,000 public transit workers that, by the way, as we can all, it's hard to remember because we've come a long way and we don't want to necessarily remember every detail, but COVID-19 pandemic happened. All these workers were still working, and so it'll be a devastating impact to our local economy. And so whether it's in Chicago or the suburbs or the collars, it's going to have an impact, right, from the economic side. But the real practical side is anyone coming in on a Metro train that has to get a connection to a CTA train or bus will absolutely be impacted. And they're going to face the question, is it worth it? If I had this connection, is it going to be worth, me taking public transit? Then what that does is, again, either they can't go to their job, school, or doctor, or they're getting in a car, and that impacts everybody because that means more congestion and more of a detrimental impact to our environment.
And we are really feeling that congestion right now.
Absolutely. There's no question, right? There's no question. We're living in a world where people that need to get from point A to point B are really reliant on whatever mode they are. And if there's even the slightest of changes, right, and inconvenience, and understandably so,
You
right?
lose them forever.
Right. And it's really challenging. So that, but also say, look, CTA serves 35 suburbs of Cook County. Metra has 80 stations in the city of Chicago. PACE does 100% of the paratransit in the entire region. We have to stop thinking this is one region's problem versus another.
Right.
We're all dependent on
Right.
each other. That's the bottom line.
So Ram, things are a little unstable at the federal level. Would you say?
I would
That
agree with
might be
that.
an understatement.
That'd be the biggest understatement of the time we live in.
So I think what would also, calm people is knowing the impact of all that instability on federal funding for transportation. Is what we've done going to be it won't really matter what the feds do? Is that how we've structured this?
In short, yes, in our
Good.
legislation,
Good.
right? And so it's important to acknowledge the federal government, and it's important to acknowledge that this isn't a Chicago, suburbs of Cook and Collier County issue only. Every major public transit system in the nation, from LA to New York and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., San Francisco, they are facing the same fiscal cliff. We're all facing it at the same time, and it's really challenging. And so the federal government was very helpful in during the pandemic. They provided a significant amount of funding to essentially bolster our public transit system.
Right.
From that time to essentially the end of this year, and it was very helpful. I mean, it's about a 20% on the whole budget that they were able to provide. That's what's running out. That funding is what's running out.
Is this the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that runs out in 26, or is that another pot of money?
That, I believe, that's another pot of money. So there's obviously the federal government during 2021 and 2022 was helpful on a number of fronts. They were helpful with operations funding
Right.
for transit, and they were also helpful because they passed historic infrastructure legislation that would provide funding and capital grants for, as an example, the Red Line extension. And so that is where that legislation really comes into play. The infrastructure funding, the funding that helps with transit operations was what's came from what's called the ARPA dollars, and so that is where this is running out. Those ARPA dollars are running out. The agencies have done their best to make it last, but any more efficiencies would mean less service, and so this legislation, House Bill 3438, that we passed through the Senate, doesn't just deal with filling that 20% hole. It doubles that investment, right? We go above and beyond to say, look, we're going to take care of the 20% through this legislation, but we're looking past that. We're looking past next year. We're looking to say, we want a system, as the Senate President likes to say, for the year of 2050, right? Give us that system. And again, not to harp on it, right? But the public transit agencies will tell you, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays have recovered in terms of ridership. Weekends and weekend nights are up. On Mondays and Fridays, though, everyone's likely working remote, right? And so I don't know that that's ever going to come back, right? Mondays and Fridays. But it's encouraging that weekends are up. That means more people are coming to the city and going back. And that also means, though, we have to look at the travel patterns. As I've said to you before, our districts are a perfect example. My district, people would love to go take public transit to the Cubs game, right?
Because they're winning.
Because they're winning, that's right. And so, but it's also a good time. Your district's a good time.
Yeah, it is.
And so, but if the service is unreliable,
right,
and there's not an express that is, dedicated and so forth, they're going to choose another route, right? And they're going to pay $60 for parking or whatever. And so that's what we're trying to address. But again, we also have to acknowledge that, it's going to have a devastating impact on people's lives that are essential workers, that work at hospitals, that work nursing homes, that work at your local grocery store, right? And really don't have another They're not doing it for leisure. They're doing it because their livelihood depends on it. So that's the spectrum of riders that we're talking about.
Well, so many people who've called our office said, I moved to Chicago because of the public
Yes,
transit
I've heard that a
system.
lot too.
So many people in Lakeview and Ravenswood and North Center, around the Brown Line or the Red Line, and people who take buses are really panicked.
Yes,
And um, and that leads me to the next question, because their panic is my panic,
yeah,
which is how can people who have signed on, I'm sure um, everybody wants to know, what can I do? What can we do to improve, to get this bill over the finish line so that we're not hanging in the balance of, political decisions and whatever the hell legislators do in Springfield, which people really don't understand. I mean, they are counting on us. We're the ones with the power. Senate did pass the bill. They put the votes on the bill to move it to the second chamber. So what can you advise people to do to convince legislators how important it is to move this forward? We're going back for veto session in October, which is really a little early. And I'm also curious about the timing of our veto session with all of the planning because of the Civil Rights Act
right.
that has to go on to prepare for.
That's
Maybe
right.
you could explain what people can do and what we're going to see to allay. I want you to tell people it's a mandate, it's a plan of a plan of a plan. It's not really, I mean, I want hope and optimism here.
Sure. No, look, the the first piece that I'll share, right, is our legislation. The plan that we put forward is, as I mentioned when I first started, uh, really transformational. Like we are talking about changing a system that's been in place for 40 plus years, that really folks have been quick to defend, but it's hard to explain why in terms of uh, you know the silos, the lack of integration, 7 different apps, the different fares. It's really challenging, right? And so the reforms that we put together have been done very methodically, right? We're talking about relying on the transit experts at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency on Planning, working with Clean Jobs Coalition. Um, they also have planning folks like the Metropolitan Planning Council and the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club and others, Illinois Environmental Council, organized labor that represents the 17,000 workers that work in public transit, um, and also, the other unions that rely on public transit, right? It's everyday people that rely on this, right? It's not, we're not just saying it's true, right? And I hope we never see the day where the system falls apart for people to really see how their life will be impacted, even indirectly, right? Even if you don't use public transit, I guarantee you that you use a service or a program that's provided by someone that uses public transit, right? And that's just how our communities are working. But we've accomplished historic levels of reform. This is unprecedented. Sarah, you've been negotiating budgets and been a part of budget conversations for a long time. And I always share the joke. Someone came to Springfield once and just chatted me up for 20 minutes, and he said, "Okay, I got to go." And I said, "You don't have an ask, a funding ask?" And he's like, "No, I just wanted to say hi." And I said, "Are you okay?" And the reality is, like, the point I'm trying to make is the ask of the agencies, the advocates, labor was 1.5 billion for educational investment. We got it in this legislation, right? And so we put this forward. This was our best attempt to put a package of reforms and funding together. Um, we worked incredibly closely with the House and the governor's office. If someone has a better plan on funding, let's see it. But short of that, I think it's really wanting to see this bill cross the finish line. And so to end, I would say I'm optimistic because I will say this, though we're going to see the agencies have to prepare with hearings on proposed cuts, which they are legally obligated to do, and they should. a responsible thing. They have to prepare for hearings with proposed cuts. They have to prepare for sending out notices to lay off workers. Heartbreaking. I wish no one had to experience that anxiety, but they have to do what they have to do in terms of their budgeting.
But it's an exercise. It, it's a plan for layoffs. It's not
It's
layoffs.
not layoffs. It is a plan for layoffs. It is a plan for cuts. Those don't actually happen till what we're being told January.
Okay, good.
That being said, it's still causing a lot of anxiety, understandably. And so, what I would say is this: we're halfway there. We have this legislation that has these reforms and has a historic level of funding. Continue to be engaged with Senator Feigenholtz in her office. Talk to your representatives in the House. Reach out to the governor's office. Make your voice heard to those different entities. Work with coalitions like the Clean Jobs Coalition, the Organized
CMAP,
Labor
right,
Coalition,
right.
CMAP, to stay abreast of what's happening. Pay attention to what's happening at the RTA board meeting. That's tomorrow. CTA, Metra, and PACE are going to have their meetings. Make sure that we are continuing to hear your voices. Share your personal stories. Tell everyone what will happen to you if public transit is cut by 40%. And that's really important because we need to continue on all of us to put the sense of urgency first and foremost. And so that's what I would say. The optimism is absolutely there, the cautious optimism, because what I would say to anybody is we've agreed on reforms. There's wide consensus on reform. This was our funding plan. If you have a funding plan that you perceive as better, please present it. But I would say that the marker has been set. $1.5 billion in transformational investment. That's what we were asked to do. That's what we were by our constituents. That's what we were told to do by the transit experts. That's what we've done. So I'm open to other funding plans, but it has to be at 1.5 billion. If there isn't one, then we'd like our legislation to move forward and really avoid this fiscal cliff.
So just a curiosity about two things. Does the impact of passing this as is any impact on redefining? I know that I have constituents who have a million ideas about the product, many of whom are very unhappy about the proposal that's on the table, and I believe that there is another bite at the apple. I think that that's what I heard via Biaggi. But I would imagine that revisiting a dedicated bus line, other transformations, roadways may be included as future ideas, especially with NEDA having an office at the right?
Yeah, no, I think everything is an opportunity, right? And so I think there's no question that public transit and redefine the drive, they may not all be in one package or one issue or one category, but they're absolutely connected. And so, to your point, we actually added, working with you and Senator Simmons, added a section on bus rapid transit specifically. We didn't want to get too prescriptive and say, this is where you need to do bus rapid transit. I would have much rather leave that to the transit experts. But we said you have to prioritize this. You have to move this up in your capital plan. Because this is, there's always going to be hundreds of capital needs, right? But as you know, and as you've told me, you've been great about informing me about what your constituents are asking for bus rapid transit. They're asking for more frequency. They're asking for cleanliness. They're asking for safety. And so I think redefine the drive. I've met with Secretary Biaggi, and she worked at the Chicago Department of Transportation. She's great. She's been very inclusive of bike and pedestrian projects. And yes, and so I think that there's opportunities there for sure for us to maybe not in this legislation, but as part of the global conversation on public transit, making sure that's a part of it.
I really think I've worked with her on a couple local projects. I was really impressed with her, and I was happy when the governor was there.
Senator, yeah.
Yes. So one more question, which is, I believe, I think I know the answer. So one of my constituents asked, CTA never raised the fares back to pre-COVID rates. Before COVID, a weekly pass was $28. It's $20 now. Monthly pass was $100, and it's now $75. I would imagine this is up to the service boards, right?
Currently, yes. And so they're all able to implement their own, fare
Right.
policies. And I think it's important to say that we should always be looking at, fares, right? And, what is a fair fare, if you will. I think that it's also important to acknowledge that while we're looking at adjusting fares, we invest in eliminating transit barriers. So there's in the legislation we reference a fair income capping fare program, right? And so if you're on SNAP, or have other financial needs, having a lower fare. We've also put in the legislation through your advocacy and others, eliminating transit barriers for survivors of domestic violence, for veterans, for those that are experiencing homelessness and much more, and youth that are working in jobs.
Right.
We're working to eliminate those barriers because that's what transit should be, right? It shouldn't be a barrier. It should be a bridge to getting someone a job or getting someone to their job, their school, their doctor. And so, yes, we should. There should be a conversation on fare adjustments. My position, in the position that we took, right, is
Not now.
not now. Let's make
Let's
sure
fix
fix things. Let's get the service to a point where
People want to
invest.
ride, and right.
I just heard that yesterday, Sarah. Someone just said to me,
Yeah.
"I'm happy to pay more. I just want it to be clean and safe."
Right.
And that's where we need to get to.
Sure, and more ridership will create more ridership. If you build it, they will come.
Yep.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody who sent these great questions in, and I believe we have over 200 people who are our guests here tonight. I want to thank you for being so involved and concerned about this. We are too. There is going to be a copy of this recording. If we didn't get to your questions, you can always email our office email address in the RSVP. Is that the one that works? Okay, the email, we have our email address in the chat, and we will continue to darken the doorstep of the transportation chairman, who has, I just want to say how grateful I am, Rob, to the 3 years of work and the commitment to, this was, I have never seen such a Herculean lift this, and I really want you to know it does not go unnoticed. And
I want to thank you for voting yes. That was really helpful in getting
right.
across the finish.
I also think that our constituents in the city of Chicago want transformation.
You do.
They want better, and they deserve better, and they deserve legislators who listen to them, who act as swiftly as possible, and work hard and negotiate with wisdom, and make no small plans.
Right. Make no small plans.
Make no small plans, and this is not a small plan. So again, help us get this over the finish line by calling your legislators, and stay tuned. My sense is we'll be having 1 or 2 more of these. So, because they're so much fun. But thank you all, and Ram, thank you for being such an incredible leader, and our fabulous staff who is here in the room.
Thank you all for joining and being engaged. This is really important. So thank you so much.
Really, thank you.